So, my name is Professor Nira Chamberlain, and I'm the president of the Mathematical Association. And welcome to the 20th edition of What is the Point of Mathematics? And today we have a special guest, Professor Keith Still. So, without further ado, I will ask him to introduce himself. Here we go.
Hi, thank you very much for having me on this podcast, Nira. It's been a long time since we first got together, where a young mathematician came up and started to talk about his PhD thesis on the gambler's ruin, which is an utterly fascinating afternoon. I'm the visiting professor of crowd science at University of Suffolk. Used to be at Manchester Metropolitan University, but left us several years ago. And I teach the principles and applications of crowd science around the world. So we run courses on how to understand crowd movement, crowd flow, crowd density, what is risk, how to evaluate risk, and about the psychology and behavior of crowds. So in a nutshell, I specialize in crowds.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it's it's good to meet you again, speak to you again. As I know we've been talking and chatting and collaborating over a number of years. Cool. So the question I'm going to ask you, I guess the title of this vlog is, so what do you think, what is the point of mathematics?
Well, in my particular instance, it's a question of life and death. The number of mass fatalities that have been involved in crowd-related incidents around the world, because whoever's organizing or planning or managing the event doesn't understand that any system, doesn't matter how big it is, has a finite capacity. So understanding things like basic flow rates, volume over capacity, once the volume of the crowd exceeds the capacity of the system, then you start to exponentially increase the risk. So trying to get across even the fundamentals, I ran a course in Edinburgh this week, fabulous group, all very switched on, but a very complex geometry, dealing with slopes and cobbles and wet weather conditions and crowd movement inside a castle and, at Murrayfield Stadium. So looking at how those crowds then interface onto the tram lines, it's all maths, and fundamentally it's how do we work out those basic numbers. So to me, it's always a question of life and death, that if you get it right, you can keep the people under your charge safe. If you get it wrong, then you introduce risk and people can get seriously hurt. So to me, mathematics is life and death.
So mathematics is life and death. I mean, just out of curiosity, could you, is there, let's say, an example, I don't know, like the royal wedding or let's say a football game that you could actually say, go into that a bit further as if you actually explain it to a 15-year-old?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the exercises, and I think I've had two this week, is how do we estimate how many people were at an event? Say, like the Palestinian March to the American Embassy, or there was an event in Holland recently, and I'm asked, how do we evaluate or estimate these numbers? I often find that the organizers will somewhat inflate their numbers, and for various budgetary reasons, organizers might claim there were larger crowds there than is feasible. Very famous American president once claimed to have the largest crowd in the history of crowds ever. And to be able to challenge that with applying the mathematics is fundamental. So if you know the area, the packing density, even in flowing systems, you can work out the flow rate related to density and flow. It is not complicated. I can teach it in about an afternoon. People can then pick it up and start working with it. But I think this is the fundamental issue we've always had with mathematics is, at school you're doing 3 apples and 2 oranges, and where's the relevance of that? When am I ever going to have to calculate that? But when you start to teach people, it's crowd flow, it's crowd flow rates, it's density, it's capacity, it's packing, it's risk, the relevance seems to resonate. And this is what I've often found when teaching mathematics, is that so long as you're making your examples relevant to your audience so that they can grasp why it's important, rather than just, I know how to apply the formula for queuing. This is how to now use it in order to work out whether you've got sufficient space, whether that environment is fit for its intended purpose, or whether it's going to have a significant risk attached to it. Once you've got that fundamental understanding of how to apply the mathematics specifically to case examples, then the light bulb goes on. People all of a sudden feel wow, I didn't realize why this was so important. And you know, I both know mathematics is everything, you know. It's the fundamental foundation of all set, and it's unquestionable, you know. It's not somebody's opinion. We've worked it out. Here's the mathematics. Here's the solution. You can't then question, you know, how you've calculated the details. You may question their numbers, but you certainly can't question the fact that if you're applying maths to it, it's not an opinion, it's fact.
I like that. It's not an opinion, it's fact. I'll say that again. It's not an opinion, it's fact. I like that. I very much like that. Okay, so final question. Earlier this year, well, actually in the beginning of 2023, our Prime Minister, UK Prime Minister, expressed the wish that he would like to see everybody up to the age of 18 do mathematics and make mathematics compulsory for those for that grouping. What is your thought on that matter?
I think that's an absolute essential, that if people don't have the fundamentals of mathematics, even if it's working out who had a starter and who didn't for paying a bill and a meal, unless you can basically understand the numbers and magnitude of numbers. I think one of the things, I come from the slide rule generation, where rubbing bits of plastic allowed us to calculate how to send a man to the moon. So in my generation, we had to understand logarithms. We had to understand the fundamentals behind maths in terms of when you use a slide rule, you got 2 decimal point accuracy at best, but your order of magnitude you had to do in your head. So that level of approximation and being able to use approximations in real life. I think John Fruin, a famous exponent of crowd science back in the late 70s or so, very famous guy, set the pedestrian planning design. He and I corresponded for a while, and he said, what these kids with a 10 decimal point accuracy in CAD plans forget is that we build this stuff with big yellow bulldozers. So, you know, we're dealing with orders of magnitude and approximation. And I think fundamentally, that's where if you pull out your calculator and you're working out your 10 decimal point accuracy and you forget why you're there and what you're doing, then you've lost the whole emphasis of mathematics. So teaching it, but teaching it in a relevant manner rather than just the abstract form. I certainly found maths quite boring when I was at school until I realized I can use it for X, Y, Z when I started to do physics. So, you know, my doctorate was in applied and applied physics. So maths, physics, and chemistry. So I think the whole purpose here is, yes, maths is essential. It's one of the core skills. Without it, you'll find almost every aspect of life is touched somehow by mathematics and being able to do the fundamentals. But it must be taught in a relevant manner. And you know, you can certainly put kids off the concept of applied mathematics with boring teaching. So there's a degree here where I fundamentally believe that it needs to be a core skill, but I also fundamentally believe that it needs to be taught in interesting and applicable manner rather than the abstract forms. And we need to get back to understanding approximations, you know, the old slide rule approach where we had orders of magnitude in our heads so that when we look at a problem, we got a rough idea of where it should lie in the spectrum. I mean, whenever I do crowd projects, I use that approach of course correction. I don't need to know absolutely where things move. I just need to know how to nudge them in the right direction. So again, that all comes from the fundamentals of using approximations and slide rules. And I certainly remember one of the first times somebody pulled out a calculator, and you do the first calculation on your very first calculator, 6,436,000 times 255 divided by 16, and you don't know if the answer is right or not. And then you say to somebody, right, what's the square root of 9? And they click it and go, 3. Oh, that can't be right. I'm expecting 15 decimal places. And that I saw that cusp, a sudden revelation that when people started using machines, they stopped thinking. So we need to teach how to think mathematics rather than just how to do numbers on sums. So the concept of mathematics, particularly when you're looking at abstract conceptualization, you know, sometimes you'll think in terms of models and formulas in colors and words and shapes and diagrams. That's mathematics. You know, when I teach in a classroom how to do a flow diagram, they're saying, what's this? And I said, it's a mathematical model. It represents the crowd flow on a diagram so that people can communicate the concepts with each other. And that's what I mean in terms of mathematics has to be relevant, interesting, applicable, and people look at it and say, well, I hadn't realized that colors on a piece of paper is a mathematical model. Well, you're just representing it with a formula, with a shape, with a diagram, in order to understand it, to then work with it. And the core of mathematics is this fundamental understanding of why and how we use it, rather than just the mechanics of banging numbers into a pocket calculator.
Okay, so I shall summarize that. Oh, bring back the slide rule.
I think historically it has a lot of, you need to switch the brain on, and you know, whenever we're teaching how to do any form of modeling, switch the computer off, get out a pen and paper. You know, you're distraction free in that environment. You know, as soon as you switch your computer on, I'll just hang on. Oh, wait a minute. There's an interesting picture of a cat. I'll just reply to that. It's too distracting. And fundamentally, when you're doing any form of mathematics, you just need to really focus on the problem. Sometimes defining the problem allows you to then let the solution pop out to you. So pen and paper, my slide rules, maybe not go back to abacus, but somewhere in between, where we need to think about why it's relevant and how to use it, rather than just apply this formula.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Professor Keystall. I mean, switch off the computers and focus on the maths. That is a wonderful way to end this vlog. My name is Professor Nira Chamberlain. I'm the President of Mathematical Association, and this was the 20th edition of What is the Point of Mathematics? Again, thank you very much indeed, Professor Keystall. Very good speaking to you again, and goodbye.
Thank you very much, Nira. You take care and look after yourselves and your family.
Thank you.